we suddenly knew exactly what we needed to make. And I'm like, man, wouldn't it be great if we just like weren't shooting in the dark all the time? Like, okay, how do we make people laugh? Like, I think that's a lot of times people on social media, they don't even know what they're shooting at. So they're like, oh, we got to get 1,000 likes. And they don't know why they have to get 1,000 likes. They just feel like they have to. So I was like, what are the things that like people need spoken to in their lives? Like, what are the needs people have? So instead of like, okay, worship, the things that are like the church things, like, oh, you got to worship, you got to pray, you got to like, which, yeah, those are all true, but that's not like, nobody's thinking like, oh man, I need to worship more. Like, no one's thinking that, right? They're thinking, oh, dude, I'm dealing with some severe anxiety right now. Like, what do I do? So talk to things people are dealing with. I mean, it's really kind of the comeback effect applied to Sunday Social, I guess.
Hey, what's up, Kingdom One family? Thanks for stopping by for another podcast. You just heard a bit from Jonathan Malm. He is a writer, entrepreneur, and co-founder of SundaySocial.tv. And in this conversation, we're going to be talking about what does the comeback effect look like in a digital space? How are we going to get our first-time visitors to become lifelong members? That's the conversation we're having today. And if you enjoy this podcast, would you do us a favor? Go ahead and give us a rate and a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Now let's jump in to our episode today with Jonathan Malm.
Welcome to the Kingdom One podcast, where we grow the church together. This podcast is here to give you big ideas and help you get practical with the tactical. Here's your host, Nick Ovalle.
Well, hey, Kingdom One, thank you for stopping by for another podcast. We have a special guest, Jonathan Malm, here. I am so excited to get to have this conversation. I've been a fan for many, many years of your writing, and it is just so good to connect with you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I love getting to do podcasts.
Awesome. So most recently, I think you made a pretty big splash in the church world with the comeback effect. It was like our guest services team at our church were just so excited to read this and to apply a lot of this. Can you talk to us about the comeback effect, what that is, and also how does that apply in our new digital space?
Yeah, so me and my buddy Jason Young, he is a hospitality guru, worked at North Point Ministries at all their campuses. And so we got together and we just wanted to write a book together. And really the premise of the book is that there are things that we feel when we go to church, especially guests, either that you feel, if it's your first time, you feel anxious, you feel maybe a little bit apprehensive. You're worried, am I going to fit in? Are there people like me who attend here? Are they going to single me out? It's a lot of things that we feel whenever it comes to going to church, especially for the first time. So the comeback effect is really about understanding those feelings, especially understanding the negative feelings, and then finding ways to replace them with positive feelings. The goal, of course, is not just to make people feel good, but the goal is to break down barriers that people, whenever we feel threatened, whenever we feel uncomfortable, we put up barriers, right? So when we can reduce those barriers, when we can remove those barriers, we actually open people up to maybe hearing something from God through the message, or encountering God in worship, different things that maybe they might not experience previously. And then obviously, whenever you've experienced God at church, whenever whenever your kids have found a place of belonging, when you found a place of belonging, you're going to want to come back to the church, right? So that's really the big premise of the book. And we talk about different ways that works out and stuff. But yeah, and then in the digital space, that's been a fun thing to figure out, because we're not getting them to come to our place anymore, right? Like those feelings of like fear, like, one of the beautiful things about mega churches is that there's this sense of anonymity that happens when you come in. You're like, oh, I'm not going to be singled out. I'm not going to, I can just kind of test the waters, see if it's right for me. Now we have the ultimate mega church for our churches. Every church is getting to experience this, where there's complete anonymity and there's maybe zero fear. So now we're having to realize that there are different emotions that people are experiencing whenever it comes to church online and digital church, where, maybe super distracted, or maybe they don't have an hour because their kids are going crazy. We don't no longer have the kids program to babysit kids while they're trying to focus on the service. So there's different criteria we need to be aware of when it comes to church online. And that is, are they distracted? Maybe are they feeling isolated and lonely? So how can we help them not feel isolated and lonely? How can we help them not feel distracted? How can we make good use of their time online? So maybe we're asking them like, hey, would you stand up and worship? And realistically, I've never stood up in worship for church online, and like my church asks me to, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. It's
Same
weird,
here.
it's uncomfortable. So sometimes we're even asking people to do something uncomfortable, and I see there's value in that, right? Like we're trying to capture this essence of what happens at church, but there are other ways to do that. I think that's where we need to find creative ways to capture that essence of church in a digital format, and that's what I think a lot of churches are trying to navigate and figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a great point with, worship, like how does that look within its context? And I think we have to go there and kind of be creative when we do those things. When we talk about small churches have had to make the pivot to, online and digital as well. Are there any things from the book, The Comeback Effect, that you have like translated into that digital space that could be like a tip or a tactic for them to actually make that first time experience for their guests great online?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big thing, and this isn't in the book because I didn't anticipate this happening, obviously, in 2018 or whenever we wrote it, but so often I think the church has become focused on content. So if we just make a good enough message, if the worship is good enough, if our production, if the stuff that happens in Planning Center is good enough, then church is good. That's a pretty recent development about church. Like we haven't been so focused on the program in the past. And consequently, what happens now is that people can either tune into, First Baptist Church in Kerrville, Texas, that has maybe 150 people. It's all volunteers. Or they can tune into Stephen Furtick or Joel Osteen or, Rick Warren, any of these just phenomenal speakers that, of course, their Planning Center production is going to be better. There's going to be better music. There's going to be better message because they have 20 people on their teaching team helping them research, helping them come up with like in compelling analogies. So one of the things I want to encourage smaller churches to do is yes, you should still have a good message. Yes, you should still have a good, worship set and all that. But that's not why people are going to choose to tune into your church versus Stephen Furtick or Joel Osteen. They're going to tune in because they're seeing their friends. They're maybe seeing connections. So what I would encourage you to do is maybe have people shoot videos. My church did this where, they had people shoot videos, and every week they edited a short little clip of like, hey, good morning, church fam. Good morning. We're glad to see you. And what that does is it shows me my friends, it shows me my people that I've been missing connecting with. And it brings me into that like community element. Because that's the thing. That's the thing we can't do online very well is community, right? And that's the thing we can do really well in person. So look for ways to build community, having chat people that are actually going to be like, oh, Joe, what's up? I haven't talked to you in forever. And it's okay to chat during the service, right? Having that personal connection is going to be the thing that will make your people choose your church over maybe tuning into someone who's doing the production better.
Yeah, I love that. I've never heard that. Just having people capture on their cell phone, hello, good morning, that type of thing. That is so good because you're right. Community means more than the content itself. The content has a purpose, but community, I believe, is why we go to church.
And so from TikTok is like people don't care about quality as much as content, right? Like they care if it's good, if it's someone that I want to see, if it's making me smile, if it's making me laugh, right? Like that's the stuff people want. So any size church, if you have an iPhone, you have a production studio. Like you can do this, right? Like any church can do this.
That is so good. That is so good. For our Kingdom One listeners, where can they find the book? Where's the best place to get The Comeback Effect?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is easy, right? It's on Audible if you do audiobooks. It's on Kindle. It's on iBooks. But yeah, it's me and my buddy Jason Young wrote it. So The Comeback Effect. And then we just recently, as of maybe a few months ago, released another book called The Volunteer Effect. So grab both of those, The Volunteer Effect, as you're starting to meet together again. We talk about how you can get, keep, and motivate volunteers. So both of those books, I think, are phenomenal resources for the church.
That is so awesome. Right now, we're trying to figure out at our church, we're trying to figure out volunteering in the digital space. And so that's something that I'm going to recommend to my team. And I'm probably going to pick up a few copies for our team. So that is great to know. I'd love to shift some gears a bit and talk about Sunday Social and talk about how this thing that you created helps feed the content machine, helps with the social media. Can you kind of give us a preview of what Sunday Social is and why you created it?
Yeah, so me and my buddy Joe Cavazos, who's just uber awesome graphic designer. He's designed, a lot of the Easter packages for some of the largest churches for the last few years. He's just a phenomenal designer. And we both realized that, 5-10 years ago, everything about church was about Sunday, right? Like there was even whole conferences that their whole motto was keep it Sunday saint or whatever, like the idea of like focus on Sunday, everything is focused on Sunday. So we had companies rising up, like Worship House Media, Igniter Media, all of these companies that were helping create resources and content for Sunday morning, because that's where all of our media was needed. That's where all of our creativity was needed, was on Sunday morning. And there's been this shift slowly developing and rapidly developing when COVID hit, where suddenly Sunday was no longer the most important day of the week. It is still like, that's still where like we gather together, but that's not where the majority of our content needs come from. That's not where the majority of our media needs come from. And we're so focused on, making a great message, that 50-minute message, making a great worship set. We're focused on these things. And so we're trying to put all of our effort there, but now we're suddenly required to create content for midweek, for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We're supposed to create content that encourage people, that can remind people to come to church, that can maybe make them think, make them laugh, that can help them maybe take a step toward Jesus during the week. So consequently, now a lot of churches are trying to figure out like, okay, now we have to do Sunday and every other day of the week. So Sunday Social really comes alongside churches, and we create content that you can download unlimited, whatever format you want. You can customize it if you want, but we come up with caption ideas. We come up with 5 posts a day. And it lets you just post on social media and encourage your people without maybe taking away from the Sunday experience. So you can actually do both really well.
That is so great. And that's something that, I think a lot of churches wrestle with, is that there's so much energy, time, and money put into the Sunday gathering that you have 167 hours outside of that you can connect with people. So I think that is fantastic. I find a lot of pastors and ministry leaders, they still kind of ignore the power of social media. Can you talk to us about how this helps churches reach more people? I'd love to hear your thoughts on reaching people via social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think even, I think there's some people who see the evangelical, the evangelism value of it. But, one other thing, me and my buddy Phil Battle, who's the creative pastor, communications director, I don't remember which, at Western Church in Atlanta, we were talking about the idea that in our Sunday services, because we only have 1 hour, I think the average stat now is that people only attend 1 in 4 services, right? Like, so we have maybe 13 times a year to hopefully revolutionize people's lives for Jesus, right? Like, we hope they can take a really big step toward Jesus every Sunday. Otherwise, there's no growth happening in their life, right? Like, that's unfortunately what we're relying on is very few times at church to make a big step toward Jesus. And that's, that doesn't work. Like, we know that like there have been a few services in our lives maybe that like, wow, that like revolutionized my walk with God. But the majority of services, we go, we talk to our friends, we grab some coffee, we leave, we go to lunch, right? Like nothing happens. And I think it's a problem that we put so much pressure on Sunday morning, and we're missing out on the opportunity to have tiny touch points throughout the week that can encourage people to take small steps toward Jesus. I mean, how do you climb a mountain? You don't climb a mountain by taking giant leaps, right? You just put 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other. And social media is an opportunity where we can help people say, hey, here's a tip on how to read your Bible today. Or, hey, I want to encourage you, forgive that person who wronged you today. Or, hey, here's a verse that'll just encourage you, maybe give you some joy this morning. And we have those opportunities. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by thinking Sunday morning is the only time people could take steps toward Jesus, because that we're not going to get big results. But man, if we use if we use social media as a chance to get people to take tiny steps toward Jesus, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important, that discipleship can happen digitally. If you're encouraging somebody to read their word, if you're encouraging them to, stay focused on God in prayer, and those touch points are so important. I think that's something that a lot of churches probably need to lean into more. One thing we talked about at the church that I attend is we talked about maybe flipping the ministry model of like our digital media team. We think of ourselves as content creators who are Christians, and that kind of shifts our gears to be like, we just need to create content, also source content from other places, so that way we can have those touch points during the week. So that's really, 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 awesome that you're thinking in those terms. Do you have a time or a story where you've connected with somebody on social media and that it was through the power of social media that you're able to make a connection you probably couldn't have made, like in real life?
Yeah. So funny is the comeback effect. My friend Jason Young, we had never met in person until we'd finished writing the book. We met online. Someone recommended him to me for like an online magazine I was running at the time, and he wrote a few articles for me. Then a book of mine came out called Unwelcome, and he's like, "Dude, that's like this book is great. Like, I would love to write something like that." So we this was all online, all on email, all on social media, where we just connected and did a few phone calls, and we literally wrote a whole book together without ever meeting in person. And then finally, we're like, hey, we should probably get together to like talk through some of the details. Like we were getting ready to get published, and we're like, we want to tweak some things, and it just might be good to get together. So we met in person, I think, a few months before the book finally came out. But the whole thing, and then this next one, the comeback effect, we have met, I think this one was our second time meeting in person, our third time meeting in person. Like we've met in person so few times, but we've written 3 books together, right? Like I just think that's funny. And I think that's the powerful social media, is that you can actually make lasting connections and actually make real, it's like something that's real together with someone that you've met online and never even connected with in person.
Wow, that is amazing. I had no idea that you wrote 3 books with somebody. That's so really, really cool to find the power of social media. How do you see that connecting with church? Have there been church connections or connections with people in the church space that have really made an impact?
Yeah, that's the funny thing about, our modern church service is largely made for extroverts. We, do the greeting time, maybe especially in like charismatic Pentecostal circles, or in, more modern worship circles. It's very much about like, if you're worshiping, the signs are hands raised, eyes closed, yelling out, screaming out. And like, that's great for extroverts or people who are maybe externally, like they emote externally. But there's a whole half of our population, there's a whole half of our congregation that are more introverted or that are more internally focused, and consequently they can seem like the outcasts at church, where maybe they want to sit on the back, and it's not because they're not engaged in the message or the worship, it's because they don't want to be on the front row with everyone looking at the back of their head while their hands are raised, right? Like, so we unintentionally reward extroverts, and we not penalize, but we like kind of look down on introverts. And the fun thing about online is that we can actually make spaces for introverts to connect, where they might not connect in person as much, but they might really connect online much more. I've had people who've talked to me. I've maybe never talked to them at service, and I see them and I wave at them and we nod at each other, but we'll have real conversations online, whereas we don't really talk in person, just because that's not how they connect better. And there's a lot of people like that. There's like a whole half of our congregation that connect that way. So I've seen that during COVID, there's a lot of people that have finally maybe engaged in church that have previously not.
Yeah, that's a great point, is half the population being introverted. How do you give those calls to action? Normally in person, it's like, hey, come to the front, or, go to the booth to sign up, and people might not want to make that. And I think the nice thing about online is that you can give those calls to action passively and through the week, so it doesn't have to be all at once. So that's a very, very good point that you bring up there. So as we talk about digital church, what are some things that excite you about digital church moving forward? What are some of the things that you're really pumped about?
I think exactly this, that we're realizing that we have been so focused on content, that we have largely missed out on community. And we realize the things that everyone is craving right now is community. So I feel like unintentionally, we have bottled discipleship to, if you just get enough content, then you're going to be a disciple. And we're realizing, and we've been realizing even before COVID hit, that that's not true. Discipleship requires this community element. Discipleship is worked out in the community. And I feel like we're realizing that, like, man, content is everywhere. Like, we're living in the information age. We're living in such an information age that we're not even sure what information is, right? Like, is this real information? Is this real news? Is this, like, we don't know, right? So we have so much information. And one of the best ways that you can work out information is in community. So, I have a question about the Bible, and I can find that online pretty easily. But now, how does that work out in my relationship to my friend or to this guy at church that kind of bugs me, right? So I think churches are going to be focusing a lot on community. And I'm not saying that churches are going to go to home churches. Some churches will, and that's cool. I'm not saying that the mega church is going to die. Some mega churches will become smaller. I think mega churches will still exist. I think there will be so many different streams branching out of this, but churches are going to find ways to make community happen in different contexts and to reach different people, because that's the thing is our, especially in the US, man, we have so much individuality where there's so many groups that, maybe this group connects in a smaller group much better, whereas this group connects in a larger group much better. And we have so many different flavors of churches that can reach different people. So, but I think that's the big thing, is that community will be the key. Volunteerism will be a huge thing, because that's where a lot of community happens, especially in large church environments. When you volunteer, that's where you meet your tribe, right? There's going to be a greater emphasis on small groups, maybe not meeting in person, maybe meeting online and in person. There's going to be just a lot of different opportunities for people to connect. I think probably churches are going to go back to the potluck once we're able to meet together again safely. I think a lot of churches are going to be like, man, we got to get together for meals as a big church and connect. Which, man, I miss the potluck.
Yeah, community is key. And those potlucks, I remember a couple of potlucks where, man, it was just, man, the mac and cheese. Some people can just make a nice mac and cheese dish.
Yes.
But I love how we're having the conversation about community, because I do think that's something that, in this digital age, we do miss. But you do see some brands that create content that does hit their target audience and makes them feel a part of it. Can you maybe talk to that tension between the content and the community? What are some ways that maybe you have thought through those things?
Yeah, one of the things that a great community does is it makes it about the people instead of about themselves. So, I got a chance to run a conference in Dallas a few years ago. And one of the things that I tried to focus on doing was, I don't make things about myself. Instead, I connect people with each other. So I say, hey, Joe, have you met Jim? You guys have a lot in common. You guys should talk. And I essentially foster connections instead of trying to make me the central point of connection. We have done ourselves a disservice with the concept of branding, where everything needs to be about the church. Everything needs to be about this, right? Whenever it comes to community, you have that one person who's in the party that just man, they just connect everyone. They're like, dude, have you met so-and-so? You need to get to know each other. And that's what a good host does, right? A good host makes sure that everyone has found their place of belonging in the party, right? And that's what we get to do, I think, as churches, is we get to create ways that people can belong. And sometimes that means just on social media, you can do this by asking a question and letting people share what they believe, share their heart. And we've seen this a lot in social media groups, oh, what's the most engaging post you've had? And it's Apple versus PC, right? That's a question that if you ask that question, you always get 1,000 different arguments and 1,000 different responses, and people are going to be really passionate about that. But that doesn't really add any value to people in the community aspect. So instead, asking things like, what's the hardest part about forgiveness to you? Or, what's a worship song that's been really meaning a lot to you? Or what's a passage in the Bible that you've never quite understood? And what that lets people do is it lets people share a true part about themselves, something that's a little bit more meaningful about themselves. And then it lets other people talk and say, hey, this is what I think that passage means. And so it fosters communication in the comments underneath. A lot of things that churches are afraid of is, someone will say oh, I don't understand why Christians are so mean when the Bible says this, right? That's people can get kind of aggressive, and it'll be tempting to shut that conversation down. But when we shut that conversation down as a church, we shut down the community that can develop from there. So sometimes that means, things get a little messy and we have to let things ride that might scare us as a church because we're afraid of our brand. Oh no, if someone doubts the Bible on our brand, that reflects on us. It doesn't. We know that social media, it's kind of its own thing. Things happen, right? And sometimes we just need to let that happen and trust that the community will work itself out through that.
That's so good to hear, because a lot of times the church has historically been communication from a one to many, and it wasn't, reciprocated. That's why we had small groups, and that's why we had discipleship groups and classes. But what I'm hearing you say is that social media allows us to have the many to many conversation, that we can talk to the church as a brand, we can talk to the pastor, we can talk to each other. So I think that really excites me the most, is like, how can we keep this conversation going? Because it's so good when it comes to faith and social media. Is there anything that excites you about the in-person gathering? I know you said potlucks. Is there something that you're thinking, as soon as this COVID situation is over, that things are going to go back to normal? Do you see things changing? What's your take on what's coming up next?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are going to be placing a greater value on in person. I think there's going to be people that are going to want to hang out a little bit longer. I think what's really exciting, and I talk about this. We made this bonus chapter for the volunteer effect, but the idea that, in a sense, as churches start to regather, there's going to be this relaunching that happens for churches, where it's almost like you maybe have a 50 years of heritage as a church, but now you're starting fresh, and you're going to have to rebuild volunteer teams. You're going to have to rebuild systems. And you have the opportunity to engage people that might have been on the fringes previously. There will be people that during this time, they've suddenly realized how much they need the in-person gathering of church, or maybe their job has changed, or their values have shifted. Like, we've all been through a severe amount of trauma in the last year, right? So people have changed, and now we have the opportunity to see people where they are now and say, hey, you've been missing the in-person gathering. You've been missing that community element. We have some opportunities for you. So we, in a sense, have the opportunity to relaunch our teams. I've seen that in churches that do multiple campuses. They'll launch a second campus. And what happens is, people who maybe have been on the fringe, who weren't maybe bought into the church, they see, oh, I'm suddenly needed. Like, there's this new campus that has no support staff, has no volunteers. I have a place of significance there, and they'll get plugged in for the first time, maybe in their 10 years of attending there. So we have that opportunity without even launching a campus, without even trying to split our church in half. We have the opportunity to engage people that have been on the fringes.
Yeah, that is great. The launch process is one of the things that we see, like dying churches, whenever we go in and help, that, that launch process is huge, because people are like you said, they want to belong, and they want to believe, and they want to act it out and be in community. So that is so good with the launch process. When we talk about connecting, how can church and ministry leaders connect with you if they want to hear more about the book and the things that you do? What's a good way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously jonathanmalm.com has all of my information, but hit me up on Instagram, Jonathan Malm. Facebook, if you want. Facebook's kind of a cesspool lately. I like the groups on Facebook, but I'm not really digging the conversations that are happening. I try to have good conversations on Facebook, but yeah, Instagram, Facebook. If you want to follow me on TikTok, it doesn't reflect well on me. I'm just trying to make funny content. It's not my deep personal thoughts about church. It's just stuff to make you laugh, and it's really juvenile and really stupid. But follow me on TikTok if you want. It's at AT Jonathan Malm. So but Instagram and Facebook will be the more professional representations of me. So
that's awesome. I love that. TikTok is something that I'm enjoying a lot right now. And the thing about TikTok that really gets me jazzed for the church space is the ability to duet, the ability to comment back. And It's almost meant to remix a conversation. Like, you start a conversation, let me remix that. And I think that's one of the best social platforms right now. Few final questions for you. What is your favorite coffee shop? Just best place to get some coffee.
Oh, so we live in San Antonio, same place. And so there's this coffee shop called the State Coffee Company that is down near the Alamo Dome. And they make really cool, cocktail inspired coffees. There's no alcohol in them, but they're just really unique. So they had a cold brew mint julep, which was just phenomenal, or an espresso old fashioned where they have bitters in it and this little wedge of orange slice. And it's just, it's so fun. I love different ways to experience coffee that I haven't previously experienced.
Yeah, that's awesome. Theory Coffee is one of the best trucks around here. So good. But Estate, I haven't been since COVID, so I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And just like one thing we love to do is we love to connect. Are there thought leaders in the church space that you think would be good for our audience to connect with? Are there people that inspire you that you look to for inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, Nick Goodner's fun because he runs this creative church group. Jason Young, my co-writer, is phenomenal. And there's this guy, Dallas Ovalle, who's really cool. He's similar last name to you and lives in Dallas for some reason. But he has this really cool perspective on getting people connected at church. Assimilation is like the word, but that sounds so like Star Trek-y. But the idea of like, how do you get new people and how do you get them part of the body of Christ? And he has some great thoughts on that. So connect with those three people, I'd say.
Awesome. Jonathan, thanks for your time. Appreciate it so much. We're going to have all those links to everything you talked about in the show notes so people can connect with you. And Kingdom One family, thanks for stopping by for another podcast. Just want to let you know, if you want to support Kingdom One, you can go to kingdomone.co/store, pick up some swag. We just launched a new line, and that'll be there for you to check out if you want to support the podcast. Thanks so much. And until we chat again, peace.